Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've been really interested in companies that have, number one, helped our response to COVID-19, but also business people that have been able to adjust and pivot during COVID-19 to launch new business strategies and or to address some of the issues with COVID-19. And so I want to introduce you to tonight, Guillaume Laverdure, who is the President and Global Chief Operating Officer for Medicom Inc. And they've got a multi-year agreement with Ottawa to supply surgical masks. They retrofitted an existing structure to house 15 different production lines. They've got procurement and ventilation systems and new conveyor belts, and they've installed mask machines with 150 million capacity, a compressor packaging, and a central palletizer. So it sounds like they've done a lot. Mr. Guillaume Laverdure, welcome to our show. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me tonight, Brian.
My pleasure. So sounds like you did a lot in a fairly short period of time. Tell me how you accomplished all that, if you could.
So Medicom has been in business in the personal protection equipment since 1988. So it's not the first sanitary crisis that we lived through. We've been through SARS, H1N1, Ebola. This one is really different from the other ones in terms of the size and the speed and the reach. So when we saw that the COVID pandemic was developing, we ramped up into production in our existing factories. We have pre-existing factories in France, China, Taiwan, the US. But we also discovered that governments were looking for local production to be able to be self-sustainable or have supply chain sovereignty, as the Prime Minister of Canada said. So we entered into discussion with several governments, one of them being the federal government in Canada. And we came to an agreement to enter into a long-term agreement, in exchange of which we have been able to open a factory in Montreal in a record time. So in 3 months, we were up and running, which is quite an accomplishment for the team.
Excellent. Congratulations. And the federal government multi-year contract, I presume, was critical to get the financing such that you could construct the plant?
So it's the critical part of this contract is to ensure that this is not a one-time PO order or activity, but it's a long-term sustainable business. I will be very open with you. Manufacturing in Canada is more expensive than China. It is. So if you don't have a long-term vision from the government, it's very difficult to be and to stay competitive and to stay on business in a Western country. So many governments have entered into long-term agreement to ensure that there is long-term supply capability, and that's the case for the federal government.
Now, obviously, when soon-to-be former President Trump closes down the U.S.-Canadian border for the importation of masks, and other people became very concerned about masks from China and other places, that kind of a strategy makes a lot of sense. But do you think that 4 or 5 years from now, new, more fiscally conservative, cutting-oriented, budget-oriented governments will keep those types of contracts in place?
So this is a 10-year contract, so there is some longevity to the contract, and I hope that some mistakes which were made after H1N1 in several countries, after they decided to build a strategic inventory just in case a new pandemic would arrive, and that this inventory were not replenished as they were used, and they disappeared. I hope this mistake will not repeat again today.
After SARS, I'm not sure about in Quebec, but in Ontario, there was a judicial commission that evaluated what went wrong with SARS. And one of their recommendations was that we kept this reserve amount of personal protective equipment. And at that time, one of the big issues was long-term care. And they wanted to have this personal protective equipment for long-term care. I had a couple of union leaders on from the long-term care facilities just a couple months ago, and they said that it was not replenished, that reserve inventory, that even the ventilators and respirators were not working, they hadn't been maintained at all, and that it was as if we had not learned anything from SARS or the Judicial Commission that was convened to understand what went wrong and what we needed to do right, and we just didn't listen to it.
So that's why I'm saying I hope people will learn from this crisis and will remember and will not take shortcuts in the coming years.
But do you believe that that's going to happen? It
I
obviously
don't know.
didn't happen after H1N1. It didn't happen after SARS. Why is this one going to be different?
So maybe the fact that there is a long-term agreement in terms of money. I'm talking about face masks and respirators that I know of. The fact that there is a long-term agreement, the fact that there is local manufacturing now in Canada, especially in Quebec, is probably a bit different from what happened in the past. Now, only future will tell.
Well, I'm glad that you've got that confidence, and I'm hoping that you're right in that regard. So, how did you get this plant up within 3 months, and how big is it? I heard 60,000 square feet. That's a fairly sizable plant.
It's slightly above 60,000 square feet. It had initially 15 machines. We just bought 11 more machines, so there will be 26 machines in this factory. We're 100 people today. We're still recruiting and to grow the headcount. We're increasing capacity. One of the things the crisis revealed is that you can't improvise yourself as a mask manufacturer. A lot of people tried. A lot of people who had no experience in masks tried and failed. Either not being able to produce or delivering product which were not meeting the regulatory requirements. It's not the first our factory to produce masks for Medicom. We had 5 factories before. And we opened several factories in the span of, let's say, 6 months. In the UK, in Singapore, Hong Kong, France, US, Montreal. So it's a fact that we have a deep network in terms of machine supply, raw material supply. We know how to operate. That made this possible. Now, is it easy to operate a factory in 3 months? No, it's not. But we had amazing dedicated team with a sense of purpose of we're here to protect people in Canada, in Quebec, and they were very proud to work extended hours to deliver that.
We're chatting tonight with the president and global chief operating officer of Medicom Inc., who is a manufacturer of masks. We're going to take a break and get back with Guillaume Laverdure in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. I've been very interested in trying to figure out how different business people, different companies have been able to adjust to the realities of COVID-19, both from pivoting their business and preparing the types of materials that we need. And Guillaume Laverdure, who is the president and global chief operating officer of Medicom Inc., is with us tonight. Mr. Laverdure, let me ask you, building plants not only in Canada but in several other countries must have had a fairly significant financial commitment. How did you raise the money to build those plants so quickly?
So we've been in business for many, many years, and we're aggressive growth business, but conservative business, going where we know where to go and knowing what we're doing. So we're not going to adventurous routes. And yes, it is a material investment for the group. We basically multiplied by 3 our capacity for manufacturing masks, and we multiplied by our capex by 10 times in a span of a year. So major investment, but long-term perspective.
So I would imagine that what it was you raised money against the net present value of these long-term contracts that you entered into with the different governments. Is that the case?
So it's a mix of very different things between our shareholders, we got a 4 million support from Investissement Québec, and just managing the business so that we're not going on adventurous routes.
And are you going to be warehousing the production over time, or are you going to be manufacturing, sending it to the federal government, and they're going to have to worry about warehousing it?
Yeah, so the idea is to have a short production cycle and deliver right away to the government. One of the things that we learned during a crisis is that even if there is inventory, the worst thing which can happen is that the inventory of products do not turn during a pandemic. So you need to have the goods as close as you can from where they are needed, where they need to be distributed. So we're shipping our production to the federal government, and they take care of distributing it into the provinces and territories based on the needs they see.
But once the pandemic is over, you've got this 10-year contract to continue to supply product. If the masks aren't being used, what's the government going to do? Just achieve the inventory turns by throwing it out?
So masks are used on a daily basis in our hospitals, dental offices, many public institutions. So there is a need outside of pandemic for face masks and N95 type respirators. So yes, a part will be probably warehoused as a strategic inventory, but a part will be used in our health system as well.
And so you do both the masks and the N95 respirators, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Do you do any other products or just those two?
So we're starting this week pediatric masks, which are masks for children, mainly school, and we're developing also production of tie-on masks, which are masks for surgeons, which tie behind the head. So we're going through the whole range of products made in Canada.
What's the benefit of the tie-on masks?
So it's a mask which is more comfortable with a lot of variants because the surgeons need to wear them for a long period of time during complicated surgeries. So you have anti-fog features, you have a lot of different things, and the fact that it doesn't tie behind the ears, but on the head is more comfortable when you need to wear it for several hours.
Why wouldn't you mass produce those and sell those to consumers as well?
So it's less convenient. You need to tie it in two places. So it's less convenient that the ear loop that you put around your ear and you take on and off and on and off. So
the not the N95 respirators, but the typical masks that people wear, is there a number of times that people should wear them before they have worn out their usefulness, or can you use them for a year?
So these masks are single use. They can be worn for several hours until they are either contaminated or wet or present some defects, but they should not be reused. The reason why they shouldn't be reused is, first of all, they can get contaminated. Second, when you take the mask off, if you don't pay attention, if you don't follow the protocol, if you touch the mask, you become contaminated. So if you put it on your desk, put it back on you, put it back on your desk and so on, you're going to contaminate the surface, your hands. So that's why it's recommended to have it as a single-use product.
Do you think most people are doing it single use, or are they continuing to reuse and reuse and reuse?
I hope they're doing single use.
Well, I think you need to get out, or someone needs to get out and educate to people in that regard, because I fear that people are reusing them on several occasions. And
so you're right. Education is important. It's new for most of the people how to wear a mask, what is important, what is critical. And there's a lot of education which should be made around how to wear a mask, how to take off the mask, and how to discard the mask without contaminating anybody.
I think that these global supply chains have really been negatively impacted by COVID-19. I'm not sure if there were other shipments that were actually blocked, but there was certainly a big concern about blockages of global supply chains. I had the president of the Automobile Parts Manufacturing Association on my show, and he said that he thought the global supply chains, because of nationalism and not xenophobia, that's the wrong word, but protectionism, worry about your own population first, was going to change supply chains, not just in masks, but a whole bunch of different products for a long period of time. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that I would tend to agree with this comment, that the fact that supply chain got so much disrupted in such a short period of time will push people to either develop local supply chain or develop securitization of supply, inventory, different diversification, different countries of production, or something like that. We see it in the PPE, where majority of the PPE was made in China prior to COVID. So today it's a much more diversified supply, but you also see it on transportation. Today, from goods coming from China, there are still goods coming from China, it's very difficult to get containers to go through the port and to transport products. So it's the product itself, it's the infrastructure, it's the logistics which will be impacted.
But as you pointed out, masks in Canada are a lot more expensive than masks in China. What is the differential in cost of goods sold? Any sense?
So it's a material difference. Now, what I can tell you is when you look at, let's say, a long-term 5-year or 10-year average of what you need to spend to cover the population, if you look at the pricing which was on during the first half of the COVID crisis, you paid for any investment that you need to have in Canada or any Western country for that matter. It's not only, I'm not only pointing at Canada, pointing at the US, pointing at Europe. It's paid off because of the spike, which was due to many things. One, the scarcity of the products, which the demand and supply was completely unbalanced. Two, there was a lot of speculation on the market, and some people raised prices in a way that was not decent.
Were speculators coming in and buying up inventory and then trying to resell it at a higher price?
Correct.
Really? I hadn't heard that before. That's interesting. Did government get in to stop that?
I don't know about this. What I know is that you had a lot of products offered, and the challenge is price is one, but quality of products and the security of origin was another issue. That's why you have a lot of complaints that you can read in the press that goods purchased do not match the requirements. Well, because they were not good products from the get-go.
Really, that's interesting. The impact of those different purchasing strategies by different states. It seems like that in Canada, we didn't have fights between different provinces or different hospitals or different institutions. But in the United States, we heard all these stories about different mayors and different governors competing against each other. Did we handle the purchasing in a different and a far better way in Canada? Or was it a mishmash here too and we just didn't hear about it?
So I don't know all the details. I can compare from my perspective, what I've seen from governments. Overall, government like the government of Canada or France took pretty good action to secure access to PPE and ensure the distribution. So it went through government acquisitions. It went through also how to fluidify the distribution by not nationalizing supply, or that was in some countries, but just making sure there is a good coordination between what is inventory and where the needs are. So I think the government in Canada and the government of different provinces did a pretty good job in trying to fluidify as much as they could the supply.
So when you were selling PPE and you entered into a contract with the federal government, did you have Premier Doug Ford and Jason Kenney competing for some of that supply, or were they buying from the federal government?
So the federal government is buying the products and then redistributing based on the needs of the provinces and territories. So we're not involved in that part.
Which sounds like it's the exact opposite of what happened in the United States, where the federal government wasn't doing the buying and each state had to compete for its own purchases.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
So the centralized buying strategy makes a lot more sense.
So I don't know if it's centralized strategy or at least a good coordination is helping, as long as it's backed by a good understanding of what is needed in the different provinces and territories. The last thing you want is to have someone or a government buy and not know what to do with it. But I don't think it was the case with Canada. And it was not the case with the different governments we worked with, where there was a lot of fluidity because of good control of where is needed where. I think the way our health system was built was helping as well to go into that direction. The
fast approval of the vaccines seems that the Health Canada in Canada and the FDA in the United States really did an incredibly good job of accelerating their review and approval of products. Did they do the same thing with PPE?
So there were different phases in PPE. The first phase where we needed masks at any cost, not from a financial cost, but any consideration. In every countries, all the rules were lifted or really made much lighter, with probably limited thought process on what's the consequence. Since then, we're back into a strong regulated environment, and I can say that these things are moving pretty well. I can give you an example. where Canada has developed its own certification for respirators, which is much better than many other countries, including the US. And they did it pretty quickly, which I'm pretty happy to see that. It's also part of the sovereignty in terms of PPE supply, that you can rely on your own regulation rather than relying on others' regulation.
We have not done nearly as well as Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, et cetera, in our handling of the pandemic. We have been done better than the United States. And some people have said that it's a culture of an attitude toward government regulation and control, where Americans made wearing masks a political issue. And in Hong Kong, Singapore, et cetera, if the government told you to wear a mask, you just culturally did what you were told and wore the mask. And Canada was maybe somewhere in the middle. Do you think that that we, and at the same time, we've had not only mask wearing impact COVID, but the flu has had one of its lowest levels of incidence in ever, because people were following public health measures and wearing masks and washing their hands and sneezing into their nose, sneezing into their elbow and coughing into their elbow and things like that. Do you think that we should have a culture of wearing masks every fall?
So I don't know if you can say we should have a culture, but will we change our culture? Most probably. I think what the COVID crisis revealed, which was already the case in Asia because of SARS, avian flu, H1N1, the habit, the culture of wearing a mask is more entrenched in the population. I think that it will probably stay to some extent in the Western countries, in Canada in specific, where the relationship of mask protection and other hygiene measures, such as washing your hands and so on, will have an impact on the population, which I think is a good thing.
I think it is a good thing. I'm not sure people will wear it every day, but in some places like long-term care facilities, for an example, that have been the real tragedy this past year, I think there is a real argument to say that we should be doing something dramatically different from a public health standpoint than we've ever dreamt of doing before. Because clearly we didn't do it right during COVID, but it only raises the issue that, frankly, we've had way too many deaths from the flu or even the common cold in prior years.
So you're right, and if I look at my private life and the people around me, you used to have a cold in the past. You were coughing your hand or elbow, but you were not wearing a mask. Today, you can't imagine coughing without wearing a mask, and I hope this will stay as a change to protect others, because that's what it's all about.
Monsieur Guillaume Laverdure, the President and Global Chief Operating Officer of Medicom Inc. I thank you very much for joining us tonight and telling us a little bit about your story in regards to scaling up so quickly, negotiating a 10-year agreement with the federal government to supply masks and helping us get through this pandemic. If you wanted to give a message to people as we're faced with this potential variant and a huge increase in COVID-19 infections, what would you tell the Canadian population right now?
Please use all the protective measures that the government is recommending. Masks, washing your hands, not gathering. This is the best thing we can do to kill this pandemic.
Well, everyone, you heard it from the CEO of the business. Mask up. Everyone, mask up. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you telling us about Medicom's story. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for having me tonight.